My name is Fiona. I lost my dad now 13 years ago. My dad was 71, fit and well. I'd seen him the night before. He'd been playing cricket in the garden with my son, and then the next morning we got a call saying he'd died overnight. I obviously did have a good relationship with my dad, but I didn't realise how good my relationship was. And after losing my dad, things just never were the same. And I thought this was part of a grieving process, and in time things would get easier, but they didn't. And I just started to exist, really. Didn't look forward to doing anything. If I had a spare minute, I'd sleep. That was my way of shutting down. I functioned as I had 3 young children at the time, and I did what was needed to be done, but nothing was done with enjoyment. It was just a means to an end: get them to school, pick them up, walk the dogs. And I just couldn't comprehend why things didn't get easier. I'd seen people lose parents and thought, okay, that's awful, and they carried on with life, and I just couldn't do that. And I did go to a couple of grief counsellors, but they never could do anything for me. And my whole view was, unless you bring him back, life isn't going to change for me. The grief counsellors, I went to one grief counsellor who was a gentleman who was really, really nice. I didn't feel that I had a rapport with him at all. He said to me to cuddle a cushion on his settee if I felt lonely, and I just felt very uncomfortable, and it just wasn't for me. And I then was recommended another grief counsellor from a friend, and I went and saw the lady, who I really liked. And we went through many things. We went through my childhood. We went through many things. And she just said, grief can affect different people. It can go on for a long time. It can go on for a short time. You will get there, but you just need to keep carrying on. You know, you need to try and do things. There was never any, I always expected to have tools. Everyone used to say to me, you need tools. They'll give you tools to be able to deal with certain situations. But I just felt that as much as I used to like going to her, I used to feel it was a real chore, because I used to feel absolutely shattered afterwards and want to sleep the rest of the day. But I never felt we ever got past a point where things ever looked better for me. As much as she was really nice, I felt that I could have gone to her for the rest of my life and nothing would change. And my whole attitude still was, unless you bring my dad back, I'm never going to be functioning and being a normal person. You know, I never enjoyed doing things. Obviously, there were moments which were good, but I always had that guilt that I shouldn't be happy. But then I knew he would want me to be happy, so I was sort of fighting with myself, really. But yeah, she was a lovely lady, but I just never felt that I ever got past a certain point with her. I obviously carried on being, the grief was still with me, and I do think over time it got worse, because I got myself into situations that I didn't want to go out. I even tried to avoid shopping. I'd ask my husband to go, because I'd say I'd be busy doing something else. I just did not want to see people. I just wanted literally to lie in my bed and do nothing. And I can remember my children saying to me that, my middle one used to say to me, if ever we wondered where you were, we'd go up in your bedroom and you were in your bed. She said, you just were there, which obviously upsets me, because that's awful for them. But that was my sort of sanctuary, I think. I don't know why, but that was my sanctuary. Anyhow, so it carried on for about 10 years. And I sort of kept on looking into grief, because I truly didn't understand how it was just me. I felt it was just me. My husband lost his father. He was obviously upset, but he carried on and functioned and did things. And then I started Googling grief. And I just I sort of stumbled into complicated grief with a lady who I can't remember her name now, who was in America, who'd done the study on it and was lecturing on it. So I emailed her secretary and asked her about it, and she said, I can't remember now, she said it was something like a 16-week course, and obviously they're in the States, but she recommended me someone in Ireland, and she said, Yeah, so I was obviously in the UK, couldn't have gone to America, found somebody in Ireland, and I actually even thought if I needed to go over to Ireland for 6 months, then I probably needed to do that. I was at a stage in my life where I thought I really do need to try and sort myself out. And then luckily, I had a lady who replied to me who said she can do it online, and that's where it started. But still, in the back of my head, I still believed that nothing would change. But I had to try and do it for the sake of myself, my husband, my children, my family. But I didn't believe that things would change. Definitely not. So I committed to the 16 weeks. I, in my heart of hearts, didn't think that anything was going to change, but I realised that I've been so miserable for so long that I needed to do something for myself, for my family, for my husband. So I committed to the 16 weeks with the view that unless this person can bring my dad back, nothing's going to change. But obviously I needed to at least try, because I realised that obviously the way I wasn't right and wasn't good and wasn't healthy for me or for my family. The process took me to places where I really didn't want to go, places that I had shelved and put at the back of a cupboard for a long time, and places that I just did not want to talk about, look at, even go close to. And at the time I sort of couldn't quite understand why that was necessary, but obviously further down the road I realised that it was necessary, and also I'd built up a very big thing that I couldn't do it. But when I actually approached the subject or the areas that I didn't want to, they actually weren't as bad, not even half as bad as I thought they would be for me. I used to dread the crying and feeling so exhausted afterwards, and those places used to make me feel exhausted. But then when I went to them, it wasn't as bad as I really imagined. I think I'd built it up a lot more in my head that actually how bad they were going to be for me. Yeah. When I used to listen to recordings of myself, it was like it was a different person. And once I'd listened to them and let the grief come in to me rather than resist it, things, I don't even understand how, sort of became easier for me. And it wasn't such a big deal. If I spoke about my dad, it was nice. It started to be a nice process of speaking about him rather than dreading getting upset and talking about him. So the process of approaching areas that I didn't want to do actually were helping me in the long term to understand the grief, to accept it and not to fight it, and then hopefully to move on with it. Part of the process was to keep a grief monitoring diary, which I wasn't quite sure why we needed to do it, but we used to have to do between 1 and 10 how we'd feel on a daily basis with our grief. And in my head, if ever I was asked, I would always say 9 or 10 every day. And then I realised when I actually wrote my grief diary on a day-to-day basis, it was never 9 or 10. It was normally maybe 5, 6, 7, maybe on a really bad day, 8. But it was never the 9 and 10 that I always had in my head that it was. And it made me realise that some days I actually had nice days, maybe not for the whole day, but for part of the day, there was no grief at all. I was just in the moment, having a nice time doing something, whereas I'd built up this thing that it was 24/7 and I was always unhappy and there was never any good things in a day. So initially I had to do a recording and speak in the present as if my dad had just died and go through the process of what happened when we heard my reaction. And that was really, really hard for me because that was calling back everything that I didn't want to face. And it took a toll on me, as in I was absolutely shattered. And then I'd have to listen to it on a daily basis. And initially I dreaded listening to it. But in time, it got easier and easier, and it's sort of settled with me. I could hear it and not get so upset. And if I did get upset, then my therapist used to say to me, "You're allowed to, it's acceptable." And I'd hear a voice saying to me, "It's okay, you can be upset." But I wouldn't be upset the whole time. I could pull myself away from it, which is something I'd learned, whereas before I just dwell and go in a downward spiral and just carrying on being upset. Whereas at some point I can bring myself back now and not get that upset. Any memories of my dad initially, even if they were nice memories, would just really upset me, and I wouldn't want to even contemplate listening to them, thinking about them. And obviously if the phone went, I used to immediately panic, because the phone was when obviously we got the call to say my dad had died, and I think that was obviously part of it. But I find in time, and even now, 9 out of 10 times my memories of my dad now, I smile, and they're actually really nice memories, and I enjoy them and laugh about them. Whereas before I never had that. It was always upset, and I didn't have happy memories. But I laugh now, and some of the things he did, I do laugh, whereas I didn't have that before. It's nice. It's completely different. Whereas before, thinking about my dad was just immediately cry, upset, feeling desperate. And now it's, as I say, 9 out of 10 times, it's really nice and really good. And I can speak about him. I speak to him about my kids more. I speak to him about my husband more. And I can laugh about him, whereas before I couldn't do that. Part of it was accepting the grief and dealing with it, but also understanding that I have got a future, there's good things to come. And one thing that I did, or my therapist said, was to go in the garden and grow plants. And I've got 2 avocado plants that have grown like Billio. And every time I look at them, I think of her, but I also think of my dad, because I just think this is something I'd never have done. I'm not a gardener at all. But they're growing, and I now doing things that I would never do and never even think I could do, because I always didn't want to be out of my comfort zone. But now I'll do things, and I even hear myself agreeing to things, thinking, I can't believe I'm doing that, whereas before I wouldn't do it. So life is very different, and I do look forward to now. Before I used to just think, I just can't wait to die. But now things look much better. Obviously there's going to be bad things come along, but things are much better, and I deal with things on a daily basis rather than worry about things that I can't control, which was a thing I used to do as well, because I was always worried that things would happen, that obviously my dad dying was out of my control, that I used to worry about other things, my dogs, my mum, my husband, but my perspective is very different now. So before doing complicated grief therapy, my existence was really sitting on the settee, going to sleep in bed, very little. If my husband said to me, let's go and do something, I would have a fear of God. No, I don't want to do that. I'm comfortable in the home. That was my sanctuary. And then once I started complicated grief therapy, my therapist suggested maybe occasionally say yes. Why not? What's so bad about saying yes? Which immediately put fear into me. But then I said yes, and then we'd go out for lunch occasionally, we'd do things. And then a few weeks later, I decided I wanted to get a bike. So we went out and got myself a bike. And then I found out there were some yoga classes in the local area, and I started yoga, which was the biggest dread. I wanted to do it, but actually turning up to a class was a really big thing for me. But once I turned up, I realised everyone was really nice. And what was the big deal about going? It's no big deal. It was lovely to go to that. And then I started Portuguese classes, which were quite hard for me because I was never great at languages, but I met more people. And all of a sudden, the yes seemed such a good thing. And why was I saying no? There was nothing to fear. Actually sort of approaching things rather than just expecting things to be bad proved to me that I could do it. And it's so much better for me. I just felt so much happier. I used to leave a yoga class feeling so much happier. And I didn't understand why, but things were good for me. And also I always felt losing my dad, I shouldn't be happy, whereas I know he'd want me to be happy, and we've all got one life to lead. And it was just a good thing for me. It was the start of how things should be again. The more I dealt with my grief and felt it and accepted it, the more I felt I could start living again, which I existed and now I'm living. And that's a positive. I've been to do 2 grief counsellors before, and the difference, I believe, was we approached the loss of my dad in a different way. The other 2 grief counsellors sort of wanted to go back to childhood and sort of issues if I had, and they never really found the spot that needed to be dealt with. Whereas doing the complicated grief therapy, we hit the spot, which obviously was very painful, but in time, things got easier and the spot started to heal. And it's a weird explanation, but it's the only thing I can. It was like a target, and everyone else was missing it, whereas the complicated grief therapy hit the bullseye. And it hurt for a time, and it was something I didn't want to face. But gradually that bullseye was hit and it healed. And it's healing all the time. I truly think that, because I think even it's been 2 years now nearly that I started the complicated grief. And I think even every week, every month, I sort of think to myself, wow, I've done this, I've said this. Oh, I've not been upset today, and if I have been upset, I'm entitled to be upset, but I move on from that minute of being upset. Whereas before I used to think, oh, I haven't thought about my dad today, that's really bad. But now I do think of him, but it isn't bad if I don't think of him. And that's the difference. My relationship with my therapist was a good relationship, but I felt there's certain things that she would say to me that sort of would stay with me, which I think not all therapists would maybe have had that effect. But I even now can hear her voice when I do certain things, or if I think certain things. And also I felt that she didn't push me, but I felt I got to a stage with our relationship that I had to trust her. So I was obliged to go to places where I didn't want to go. And maybe if I hadn't had that relationship with her, I'd have just said no. But I did feel obliged, but not pressured. But I sort of trusted her enough to approach things that I thought I couldn't approach. And that's the difference. Whereas maybe if I hadn't had the rapport with somebody else, I'd have not trusted them, and I wouldn't have maybe gone to the places, and therefore I wouldn't be where I am today. Because probably I started to notice very, very, very small steps. I'm not saying anything, it wasn't a eureka moment, but I started to notice that things were starting to slightly get better for me. Even things like, I think I trusted her because she told me that if I said yes, it wouldn't be that bad. And actually she was right. And every time I did do something, that reinforced what she'd said. And therefore I trusted her more and I started to believe then that maybe this complicated grief therapy actually would make a difference to me, who was obviously very, very, very sceptical beforehand. I felt that she always listened to me, and as much as some of the stuff I was saying was probably totally illogical, she was never judgmental on what I said. And if I cried, she was always very sympathetic. She had empathy, but also I felt that she she understood. I think understanding how I felt was very hard for most people to understand. And because I didn't really understand, I obviously understood how I felt, but I just couldn't understand why I felt like this. And obviously hearing that she dealt with other people who I felt had a lot worse grief than I had, you know, losing a child maybe, to me would probably be the worst thing in my life. But she never judged me, you know, and because sometimes I used to think, oh, this is ridiculous. You know, okay, it's my dad, but I'm a grown woman. But she never judged me at all, which I think built up a rapport with her and trust with her. I think I was very ignorant to there's different types of grief. And I did believe that, you know, I think I believed that everybody loved if you love someone, everyone loved everyone the same. And I realised there's a lot of depths between love and how much you love someone. But equally, I didn't realise that there's so many different types of grief. And I was taught by my therapist that there are different types of grief, and one isn't right, one isn't wrong, and we have to deal with it. But one thing that she always said to me on our first session was, your grief is like you've got to the train station, you're about to leave the train and you've come off the tracks. And that sticks with me because that is exactly how I felt. And that sort of probably helped me build up a relationship with her, because it was finally someone understood how I was feeling, rather than, oh, you're miserable, why are you still miserable, you know, it's been a year, it's been 2 years, you know, you need to get on, pick yourself up, sort yourself out, you know, why are you miserable? And finally someone actually understood why or how I was feeling, which I, as I said before, didn't really understand why or how. And I was taught by her to understand why and how. Before complicated grief therapy, I existed. I did what I needed to do, as in functioning, but I never enjoyed anything. Everything was a chore to me. Since having complicated grief therapy, my life is very different. I laugh now, which I hadn't done for a long time. I smile. I've gone out into the world now. I have got a group of friends. I do yoga. I'm doing teacher training yoga now, which I'd never in a million years ever thought I would ever do. And I hear myself saying yes. People invite me to do something and I say yes, whereas part of me from the old self would go, no, why are you doing it? And now it's like, yes, and I go and I enjoy myself and my life is very good. The sun shines most days for me. Yes, I do have the occasional time when I sort of go back, but I've got the tools now that I hear a voice saying to me, you're allowed to be upset, which I am. But then I pull myself away and I go off and I carry on with my life. And that is a very, very big difference for me. I am welling up because I can't believe still that I am where I am today, considering where I was for a long time. And all I would say is I would highly recommend it, because I was the most skeptical person to ever do it. But I literally just got to the end of the road where I realised I needed to do something, but never in a million years would I think that I would get through that process and get back to being me, which I couldn't even remember who me was. But I'm finally finding myself on a daily basis who I am. I'd like to say that, but having the complicated grief that I had, part of me thought I wasn't worthy maybe of being happy again. And we are all worthy of that, and we all are decent people. And I know that our loved ones wouldn't want us to be upset. I'm getting upset now. And that is a big thing, because lives are really short and, you know, we need to make the most of our lives, and we want to be happy, and we're entitled to be happy. We're not bad people. Yeah, so if you are listening to this, there's definitely hope. I really sort of regret now, obviously having 10 years of being really miserable, but that was the process. But I'm here now, I'm alive and well and enjoying life. And, you know, definitely it's the way forward. You know, you will get there slowly but surely. Don't expect it to happen overnight. It is a long process, and times you'll think, why am I doing this? It's not any better, but you really will get there. And it's an ongoing thing. As I say, I did it 2 years ago, and every day I just feel that bit better. I do more things. Life is better, definitely better. And actually saying that, everyone used to say to me, you know, it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. And that used to really annoy me, because I used to think, oh, I wish I hadn't loved him and then I'd be fine. But now I agree, it is better to have loved and lost and never to have loved before. Again, never to have loved at all. I agree.